All right, guys, welcome to the Tuesday Notes, going over some different dynasties in China that we're going to be talking about. So obviously, we're just going to run through them. We're going to go kind of quick. We'll stop at the important stuff, but there's so much information because China's been around forever that we're going to have to kind of skip and glance things. Otherwise, we'll never get through it. All right, so obviously, we're going to start with the Shang, the first one. All right, so we always want to know the first one, and the Shang is probably not the actual first one, but it's the first one that we actually have historical evidence of. There are ones that the Shang kind of talk about prior to them, but we don't really know enough to even count them. We just kind of know that they existed. So the Shang's the first. It's called the Yellow River Civilization at start. It's a Bronze Age civilization, and one of their biggest things is the development of the writing, pictographs to ideographs, and we'll look at some examples of that later on as well. So here would be the pictographs into the Semitic phonetics, which is kind of more of what we kind of consider more of a modern style compared to obviously the pictographs, which are just little pictures. Again, just because they were so far back, they still were the Bronze Age, so they had some different weapons and other things made of bronze, because that was obviously the Bronze Age. One of the cool things we get out of the Shang Dynasty is this thing called the oracle bones. So you have like chicken bones or fish bones or maybe like a turtle shell, something like that, and you have all these little pictographs on there, and then they would light it on fire, and then how the way it would crack, the oracle or the fortune teller person could read what the cracks meant, and they would kind of tell you your fortune and or your future kind of deal. All right, so the oracle bones are important. This will be on the quiz, so let's star that one. The oracle bones. That's what they would use. The Zhao dynasty. They're important to us. They're another one. They're the longest lasting dynasty. That's obviously important. But their main thing is the mandate of heaven. This is why we talk about the Zhao as the mandate of heaven. All right, so here's what it is. All right, so it's basically like four principles of the mandate of heaven. First one is the right to rule is granted by heaven. There is only one heaven, therefore there can only be one ruler. The right to rule is based on the virtue of the ruler, which basically means like virtue is like how good you are, like your good deeds and stuff like that. Your virtue is how good you are. And the right to rule is not limited to one dynasty. All right, so the central question is, how might the mandate of heaven be used to explain the downfall of a dynasty? So I'll kind of let you guys think about that one, and we'll answer it tomorrow. How might the mandate of heaven be used for the downfall? Let's say if you maybe, for example, here's one little hint, is what if something comes out that the ruler is doing something bad? Wouldn't that technically break the third rule, which thus would mean that he's no longer mandated to rule me? All right, so that kind of leads to it. So we'll keep that in mind as we roll through. I'm skipping through some of these little picture things. The pre-Golden Age dynasties, we got the Qin, the Han, the Su. The Qin, very popular, right? The Qin is kind of the first empire. So their ruler, named Shi Hongdi, he's going to become the first emperor of China. So we want to know his name, right? So Shi Hongdi, first emperor of China. He rules in the Qin dynasty. We call it legalist rule, where like everything is very strict. It's kind of more like a very strict economy. The government's all hands-on, so the government's controlling a lot of your life. Centralized control is kind of what that means. The government basically runs every person inside of China's life. Military expansion, we get book burnings. They wanted to throw out these Confucianist ideas from earlier. We'll talk about Confucianists a little bit later. And if you protested, you were buried alive. Okay, so that's centralized rule. Also during the Qin, they built the largest section of the Great Wall, because the Great Wall took so long to make that all these different dynasties kind of helped play their role when building it. It's kind of like the next dynasty just continued on until it eventually got completed. The Qin dynasty, important because of the unification of China. Obviously, if they're the first empire, you have to unify all of China to be the emperor. Known for the enormous public works project like the Great Wall. Heavily legalistic, anti-Confucius, which again, just more like the government is going to control a lot of the aspects of the general population. And again, this is kind of what sets the precedent for imperial China. This is why China's always, even up until like after World War II, China is really heavily controlled by the government, and that's why they went communist during the later parts of the 1900s. Okay, unified weights and measures, little things like that. We're going to skip over that question. Shi Hongdi built the Great Wall, did away with the feudal system, established a cultural uniformity. So he basically helped establish what is Chinese culture. He built the Great Tomb. You guys saw that in the video. And then burning of books of decrees. So he was really trying to burn all other thoughts and ideas that were out in the world. He wanted to make sure that those got burned so that the general public didn't even know that there were other options out there or other ideas. All right, that's kind of the big thing. The Great Wall, it's built as the last line of defense. It's used system of signal fires. You guys saw that in the video. Constructed using stone, masonry, packed earth, and even bodies. Remember how the Great Wall, its nickname is the Long Graveyard because a lot of workers died working on it, and when they died, they just threw them inside of the wall and used their body as extra material. All right, so the Great Wall, aka the Long Graveyard. In each tower, you just light a fire in your little tower to signal that the next one that there is an intruder coming, and then next thing you know, it's kind of like playing a game of telephone with the fire inside the walls. All right, we'll skip ahead a little bit here. I know we're going fast, but that's okay. That's kind of the point. Another thing that comes out of Shi Hongdi is the Terracotta Soldiers, the Terracotta Warriors. Shi Hongdi, he was big into drinking mercury, which poisons you, obviously. So he started to kind of lose his mind a little bit. And he figured that he was going to go to heaven. And he wanted to kind of rule heaven. So what he did is he kind of had these terracotta soldiers who are based on real people. And he buried them. And he was going to bury himself with the terracotta soldiers. So when they went to heaven, they would come with them, and he would have an army that would allow him to take over heaven. Again, don't drink mercury. That's what happens to you. But imagine that some farmer originally found one of these, like he was digging and found one, and then next thing you know, it ended up being a whole army in this guy's kind of yard. So there's like I think there were 6,000 in total. I mean, there's like legit people who have like chariots and horses and all these are real size. So the horses are the real size. The people are the real size. The chariots are like based on real size. So like these things are absolutely massive that are inside this pit. Each soldier is based on a real life soldier. So all their faces are different. All their armor is different. And I'm pretty sure they used to have color on them. But since now that they've been discovered and oxidation has kind of taken its role, now they're kind of like green. But at the very first time when these were uncovered, all the armor was different color, like it showed the personality, and they're probably used on real people. Like these soldiers are based on probably the real soldiers of his army. All right. He ended up sentencing his own dynasty when he sent away his eldest son, one of his other sons who took over and was ruthless and lacked the authority. Basically, he picked the wrong kid to rule. So as a result, the Qin dynasty collapsed and the Han dynasty emerged. And the Han dynasty is something we've been looking at a lot. Because it's important because it's considered to be as prominent as Rome. Okay, so the Han dynasty and the Han Empire, very, very influential. All right, we talked about Lao Bang today in class. Confucianism makes a return, and again, we'll talk more about Confucianism as the week goes on. All right, civil service exam, the Silk Road, and technology advances. So all these big things. Lao Bang is the first emperor of the Han dynasty. He institutes this thing called the civil service exam, and basically all the elite class kids would go to school and they would get taught all these Confucius teachings, and then they would take like a civil service exam, which basically is an exam that you take, and at the end you get the results that basically tells you which job in the government you are best for, and that's the job you would get. All right, and the civil service exam sticks around and was in use up until like the 1930s. So starts here in the Han before we're even at the year zero, right? We're still about 220 years or 200 years away from zero, and then it goes all the way to 1930. So it's pretty crazy how much it worked and how often it was used. Under the Han, we get the invention of paper. We get and all this stuff kind of spreads along the Silk Roads. All right, so the Silk Road trade develops. Improves lives for many as merchants. We get the introduction of Buddhism into China thanks to the Silk Road. We talked about that last unit with India, how the Silk Road was used big time in the trading of not only like goods, but also ideas and religions. So that's one example. We're going to skip that, skip that, skip that. The Empress Lu takes over. So Liu Bang ends up dying. Um, his wife, Liu Bang, seizes control of the empire. She has a young son, but the young son is too young to rule. So she's going to rule de facto in his place until he's old enough. Well, he ends up dying at a young age, so she's able to take control. But as you see here, palace plots and power plays occur throughout the Han Dynasty. She also was friends with a lot of, actually we'll save that for the next person, I believe. The Martial Emperor, Liu Bang's great-grandson, Wudi rules from 141 to 87. Wudi is considered the Martial Emperor, as he kind of inputs a lot of other very strict government rules on his people. And under Wudi, they definitely go out and they expand the Han Empire. So under Wudi, they probably expand the most. So he'll colonize Manchuria, Korea, and also areas that would be now like Vietnam. So they under Wudi, they really go out and they go and they advance and conquer a lot of lands. Confucianism, the road to success. Wudi government employs 130,000 people. Civil service jobs, government jobs obtained through examination is how you get those jobs. Job applications began to be tested on knowledge of Confucianism. Wudi favors Confucian scholar, build schools to train them. Only sons of wealthy can afford the expensive schooling, so that basically the cushy government jobs are always being given to the elite families of China, where the peasant class and so on normally don't have the funds to send their kids to the school. Thus, their kids cannot take the civil service exam. Thus, they can't get the government jobs. So it's basically a way of keeping the royal elite families. They just keep staying the elite families, and no one else is really allowed the opportunity to do so. All right. Emperor Wudi, sort of public schools, Manchuria, civil service exam, help bureaucrats. Okay, I think we got that part down with him. And again, we'll read about these people as the week goes on. This is just going to be like some baseline stuff. A lot of it was talked about in the video as well. Assimilation is a key word for us. Integrating conquered peoples into Chinese culture. This is what Wudi would do. After they would conquer a certain area, instead of like letting the people kind of do their own thing, he would kind of take them and forcefully assimilate them into Chinese culture. So he'd kind of have to teach them how to do it. You know, women's roles, all these things would play a factor. So if you were conquered by the Chinese, they would basically force you into Chinese culture. So eating their food, you know, language, religion, different stuff like that. The last one is the Sui Dynasty here. Important because the last of the pre-Golden Age dynasties. Many public works, again, just continuing on with the Great Wall, but they also built this thing called the Great Canal. All right, so the Great Canal is one of the big things. This is talked about in the video as well. So that's why we need to talk about it. So the Sui Dynasty, the Great Canal, go together, and I'll show you guys the Great Canal here. All right, there it is. Again, man-made. Took years to get done. Imagine someone, they gave you a shovel, and they said, this is eventually what I want it to look like. Get to work. And that's kind of what happened. So it's very similar to like the Great Wall. A lot of deaths, hard to build. But in China at this time, remember, if you're a general peasant or if you're like a farmer, you are, by law, you're supposed to give 1 month of your time to either military service or civil works projects. So for a month out of your year, you would work on the canal or the Great Wall for free, unpaid. And you're also not farming or growing your crops, so it's kind of a catch-22 for the peasant class, right? And that's why we see a lot of these dynasties end, because the peasant class kind of rules up, and we get some type of coup or some type of peasant revolt that kicks out one emperor and puts another emperor in, and then we get a new dynasty. All right, so the peasant revolts are a big reason why all these kind of dynasties come down to the end here. Again, establish an army of professional soldiers. People were overworked and overtaxed, which obviously is going to make them upset, which leads to a rebellion, which leads to a new emperor and a new dynasty. All right, we'll look at these all kind of a little more detail as the week rolls on. This was just more kind of getting us ready to go. And I only have 15 minutes for the online, so it's really fast. I apologize, guys. But it may not make a lot of sense now, but it will as the week goes on. We'll start kind of filling in the pieces and spending more time on the big topics like the Mandate of Heaven as the week goes on. So right now it's kind of everything we're going to look at. And then as the week rolls on, we'll just start picking them apart, and we'll start diving into more detail on each one of these kind of dynasties. We've been spending a lot of time on the Han recently, and we'll kind of move on from the Han later this week. But that's all I got, guys. Have a good week, and I'll talk to you guys later.